And welcome, Casper. We're so very happy to have you here.
Great to be here. Yeah.
I just want to give our audience a little bit of what we have planned for them today and how we have structured our session so that they know what to expect and how to prepare their questions, right? So Casper has been so very kind to agree that we mix things up a little bit. So we'll do the session in 3 blocks. And each block will be focused on one of our GapSummit topics, accessibility, adaptability, augmentation. And I have some of my questions for Casper here.
They were really hard questions. I just rehearsed them. So this is why if I'm nervous, it's about her questions.
He says so, but then, you know, he was already answering during the prep call on the spot, perfect answers. So I'm sure he'll do great. And then after each block, I'm going to let a few questions from the audience. So as we are speaking through and drawing from all the sessions you've already had during the days, already start thinking about those 3 principles and the things Casper is sharing with you and, you know, how they apply for you and what are some things you want to learn from Casper. So Casper, IFF is really unique as a company because you work across so many different sectors, food and beverage, SEN, healthcare, and biosciences. And as you were introduced, you're the Chief Research and Development Officer for all of those sectors. And you lead a team of over 1,000 professionals globally. Can you maybe tell us about how you adapt your leadership style to these different sectors and these different topics? And, you know, what are some of the unifying principles of innovation that you think are applicable across the board?
Yeah, so it's a good challenge indeed, right? So you end up in a role. At certain moment in my career, I led a team of 100 people in Palo Alto, California. And I was like, wow, that's 100 people. It's, you know, but they were all biotech people. They were either a molecular biologist or a biochemist, which is what I am too. I'm a molecular biologist by training, which is kind of easy. During the when I studied, actually, I think restriction enzymes were sort of state of the art. So anyway, so I think as long as you now I'm leading an organization of over 1,000 people. Well, there's people that lead 100,000 people, right? So it's not that impressive, but it's across the globe. It's everything from fermentation engineers to formulation engineers, analytical NMR, mass spec specialists, regulatory people. I think one of the true realizations that I have had, I'm still a scientist. I'm primarily interested in how we can convert science, really good science, into, I'm passionate about combining various disciplines of science to bring products to the world that add sustainability benefits, health benefits, that are good products for the world. I also don't mind if our products that we develop in R&D are money makers in a way, because then we can reinvest that money into R&D, right? Where I was going with that remark is like, I think every day that I come into work, I still realize, you know, what I liked when I came into work when I was at the bench. And I think as long as you keep understanding why people want to come into work, what motivates them, and it can be purely like, we can do awesome science here and we have a little bit more money to do science here than we have in academia, because we typically have a little bit of larger budget in the industry. Right? Not that I'm advocating to be an industry, right? You can also say like, well, in academia, I have more academic freedom. Absolutely true. So I think you need to realize that everybody has a choice to be where they want to be, but everybody has a reason to come into the morning and what they do. And I think as long as if you understand that, it becomes really natural to lead a larger group of people and to kind of hopefully inspire them to do the right thing.
Amazing.
So staying close to the science, in my view, you know, it would be really easy to go. We're in the budget cycle, right? Mid-year budget 2026, capital budgets. What equipment can we do? Which sites are we gonna expand? Which sites are we gonna shrink? The board meeting is coming up end of October. I need to present to New York City to the board. It gets really easy to get caught up in all that kind of management stuff. That is not what inspires the people that are doing the science. As long as you realize that, you have to all take care of that to allow people to do what they're really good at, which is the science.
That fits kind of really nicely. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about the passion you have for sustainability, for innovation, for science, and of course, you've led IFF's efforts in protein engineering and world-class manufacturing of goods for businesses. But it seems to me that as an industry, we are still somehow struggling at times to convert the efforts that we are putting into the scientific development to the impact that we are really have in mind as we are developing. So what are the challenges that you see in that, and how are you and IFF working to deal with those challenges?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think as scientists, we're all of idealists, right? You know, I would love the idea of developing a polyesterase enzyme and take a plane and fly over the Pacific Ocean and dissolve all the plastic in the world. And first of all, that's not going to work because the scale is too massive, the water is cold and salty, so my enzyme might not work. What is maybe disappointing as a scientist, but what is reality, the impact you can create is largely through, in our case, through products that we sell to CPG companies. Unilever, Procter & Gamble, ADM, Tate & Lyle, they are developing products that use our ingredients. That's as simple as that. The primary reason why these companies buy our products and like our products are two things. Also disappointing, right? They're performance. You know, the stuff needs to work, and it needs to work better than the product of the competitor and better than the current product, performance, and cost. Right, those are the two main reasons that companies buy our products. We, however, also want to have a sustainability impact or a health impact. So all of our products, people don't realize maybe that my father did his laundry at 90 centigrade, we now do it at 30 centigrade. This is enzyme enabled. This is almost purely enzyme enabled. That's why we can now save massive amounts of energy in the world and CO2 reduction. Just one example. Biofuels is another one. Animal nutrition and with much less phosphorus waste is another one. We're all over these spaces. That is what we like. But companies are not going to buy that simply for sustainability. Sustainability is nowadays considered table stakes. Big companies are not going to buy a product anymore if it's not if it's not meeting their sustainability targets. But still, if you don't add performance, they're not going to choose your product. So we have to have a different mindset, like primarily focus on a value proposition where performance and cost are number 1 and 2, while we know that our products are bringing sustainability. And I think many inventions that are coming from either academia, startups, and from companies like us sometimes fail to have the impact that we hope they're going to have because we haven't thought through where the value and the cost is.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that also part of that communication gap comes from the very different aspect that sustainability has? I mean, sustainability is energy saving, production in manufacturing. So it could be that your product is sustainable on the side of the customer. It could be that it's also sustainable simply by how it's manufactured and produced in your facilities. So is there a communication gap there as well in terms of when we use a broad term like sustainability, that then we kind of lose in it the meaning of what we're really impacting there?
I think that is true actually, and we as companies also struggle with that sometimes. I think what does really resonate with governments and with consumers in a way? You know, ultimately consumers are our biggest stakeholders, right? We have sustainability targets for 2030. One of them is, for example, that we want to save 50 times more CO2 emission through our products compared to our own CO2 emissions. So we measure our own CO2. So there's two ways to do that, right? Either you're going to drastically reduce your own CO2 emissions, which we are. Mm-hmm. We have now solar energy in our plants. You know, we buy sustainable energy, etc. But of course, you already feel if you have a 50x lever, the biggest lever that you're going to have is on the 50 and not on the 1. So we have these targets. I still think we make this too complex. Mm-hmm. Now, if it's like, yeah, okay, if a company like Procter & Gamble with Ariel in Europe or Tide in the US can advertise like, hey, you can actually go from 60 to 30 centigrade, that is on the label, you know, that is pretty easy to understand for a customer. but many of our applications are actually way more complex. And I think we are not eloquent enough sometimes in translating the message to something that the larger consumer base, even the ones that are not very passionate about sustainability, understand. And we can't have the impact we need to have if we are developing niche products. And I think 10%, 15% of the consumers will pay more for a sustainable product. 85% of they want to have a product that works and that is as cheap as possible.
And presumably a lot of that is cultural as well, right? And then it's backgrounds that you can't really control. So you have to operate and communicate differently.
I even see it if I travel in the US. If I'm either on the East Coast, I'm based on the West Coast, but I go to the East Coast a lot, but I also go to the Midwest a lot. Completely different societies. It doesn't matter what my opinion about these societies or where I want to live or not. There is massive amounts of people that have happy lives everywhere around the world, including differences in the US, and you see a very different attitude towards these kind of aspects, even in a country like the US.
Amazing. I think now is a good time to take a few questions on some of the things we were already discussing. So I hope you guys were thinking as we were talking. Ivan, I see I'm going to train my memory now as well in terms of names. I'll try.
Thank you, Adelina, for moderating the Firechat chat, and thank you, Casper, for coming to the GapSummit. Ivan Jover from Biotech, Director of Entrepreneurship.
Great conference, by the way. I was there last year.
Thank you. We are great partners of GVR.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing the leaders to our community and synergize. So one frustration I see in these past couple of years is that with this economic downturn, a lot of the biotech synthetic biology applications in planetary health, more in the chemicals and materials space and food tech, they are struggling a lot because are molecules that require like enormous masses of production, and the prices might not be as higher as compared to another molecule in the pharmaceutical space. However, I think are the most important supply chains that we need to fix. And it seems that now the innovation is like staggering a little bit because of this dilemma. And on top of that, like the World Economic Forum report, Advancing the Bioeconomy, it's mentioned that, for example, oil and gas, they keep getting 5 subsidized per each 2 of bio-based solutions. So we're seeing legacy businesses that they're all the status quo, products in the market, and they're on top getting subsidized, and it's not a fair playfield for biotech. What are your thoughts on overcoming that? It's like on the government side that we're going to find like the green taxation, or is like just getting better innovation, better narratives, combination of both, or whatever?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting dilemma, and I of course don't have the answer to that, but I think you have to be realistic. The world is the world. Everywhere in the world, and especially in the US nowadays, we see less support, for example, for subsidies for sustainable solutions. Now, current administration in the US is a little bit more favored towards oil-based as compared to other things. The next 4 years may be different, or maybe not. And so I think that's reality. So I applaud governments for subsidizing sustainable industries, etc. But the moment you become very dependent on them, you have to realize that it may not be the long term. And I think many of the startups in the world, and also in the Bay Area in the US, they have benefited from previous administrations that put a lot of subsidies into sustainable technologies and also health technologies. The current administration abolished a lot of the subsidies from the NIH for health researchers, but also for sustainability. That's it. We as a company, we have been around for a long time, and we know that this is always going up and down. So we don't want to become too dependent on these kind of initiatives, because we realize that ultimately, if we develop the right products that are cost and capital, and explain what that means, cost and capital efficient, we can continue no matter what the economic climate is. Why, at the moment, in the absence of subsidies, many of the startups that look pretty promising are struggling is I think at certain point, precision fermentation became a big thing, right? Precision fermentation, honestly, is a little bit of a fashion term, right? We say like, well, this is what we've been doing for the last 40 years, right? We've been carefully growing organisms to make things, right? A lot of the new companies focused on for example, edible proteins to make in a fermenter, lactoglobulin, and they dissolve that and they call that milk. Like if it's one protein, you would love to make dairy proteins more sustainable by not taking them from a cow, but from a fermenter. However, you have to realize if we build a new fermenter, it costs us about $20 million in an existing facility. You're not even talking about a new plant, right? You have to convince your shareholders that that is a good investment, because you could also put that $20 million in the stock market and make money from that, right? So you have to have a good value proposition why it is a good idea to put that $20 million into a fermenter there. So you have to start making that money back. And we can do that quite easily on enzymes, because you can make so much enzyme in a cubic meter of fermenter, and enzymes are only used in tiny amounts in biofuel production, in laundry, in animal nutrition, in bread making, in beer brewing. And they're not like stoichiometrically edible proteins. So I think the value proposition of a lot of companies that started to make edible proteins by precision fermentation is just not ripe at the moment for commercial success. I would love to do it to be ripe, because then you could have a major sustainability impact. But again, investors are not primarily interested in sustainability. They're primarily interested in a financial return on their investment. Mm-hmm. That's a disappointing message as a scientist, but that's reality.
Maybe there are like ripple innovation. Where to start?
Absolutely. I mean, ultimately this will come. If we would be sitting here in 20, 30 years from now, I don't want to think of that, by the way, then probably a lot of these things have happened already. And we are like, well, in the 2025 area, we were still struggling, and now actually it will come. Yeah.
I think that's a good transition to what we wanted to talk about next, which was innovation. And actually the fact that if we really think about the pace of innovation, there is an inherent paradox there, that we want to innovate to be current and to address challenges, but it takes years to bring our products to the market because of regulation, validation, and testing. So in itself, innovation is a really kind of looking into the future practice. And from your position as Chief Research and Development Officer across so many different types of innovation businesses, how do you bridge this time paradox? And how do you make sure that what you're doing today will stay relevant in 5 or 10 years when your product actually hits the market?
Yeah, basically I have two answers here, two trains of thought. First of all, we have a new CEO. He's there 1.5 years ago, and he came in with a lot of energy. He's a great guy, by the way. Eric Fields came from Syngenta, and he said, innovate faster. I'm like, wow, I like that. Innovate faster. Yeah, I love that. But then you start thinking about how do we innovate faster? And to your point, what I call innovation is the moment you start something until the moment you start selling it in the market and making money, right? And seeing the impact in society. And with all the new technologies that are really exciting, AI, gene editing, massive DNA sequencing for no money almost, DNA synthesis, and name it all, and so R&D, research is not a bottleneck anymore. We are overwhelming our friends in process R&D and our manufacturing plants and our regulatory colleagues and our customers with new innovations. So we have to see what it takes from an end-to-end perspective to push things on the market. And I want to see products that have immediately a large uptake in money, because then you can basically say like, well, this was a good product because we're making lots of money. What you need to do for that is you need to start registering that from a regulatory perspective in many countries around the world at the same time. You need to have all the quality control for your global plants, the plant in China, the plant in Argentina, the plant in the US. So a lot of the activities that you need to do to ultimately accelerate end-to-end are not primarily the research. That's answer number one. The second is also a very good point that you make, like especially nowadays, the societal trends, they go faster and faster and faster. So you need faster and faster innovation cycles. So what Unilever or Procter & Gamble or EM are asking us today is probably different as what they're going to ask us next year. So what I do, I reserve, across IFF more or less, I reserve 15 to 20% of my R&D budget into something I call core technology development. Nobody in the business likes this. Because they're going to be like, why do I pay for a hobby in R&D, right? Yeah, but what I do there is I develop new gene editing technologies. We develop better production strains that we're going to use across the board. We're going to develop better extraction technologies for the next flavors. We're going to develop better agronomical practices for lavender plants, for fragrance ingredients, 15 to 20%. So in order to be able to react very quickly to changing market needs, you need to have a very solid technology base that is continuously improving. And then on top of that, you build a portfolio where 80% of your people are like business-specific projects. Like the new amylase that is going to end up in tap cold water next year, or in 2 years probably, right? So 20%, 80%. So if you keep your 20% strong, you can continuously feed the 80% with the best-in-class technologies that allow you to be really fast. We are sometimes hit with like a last-minute formulation change in the laundry detergent of Procter & Gamble that makes our lead candidate not work anymore, because the pH is different, or we can immediately go back to a library of candidates and quickly screen and pull out another candidate from the same innovation that does work. That's what I mean with like building a stronger base and then leveraging it into the different projects.
So is this how you respond to the ever-changing pressures from the outside to merge short-term adaptation and long-term vision through this sort of division between core innovation or technology development and sort of more customer-driven adaptation?
There was, in our industry, there one hiatus. I'm sometimes jealous of my friends in the Bay Area that work for Google, right? Or let's say Apple. They have they have a beta version of an app, right? And I want to have this in the market, so I can easily overnight push my app to all of your phones, and I do a beta version. If you guys don't like it, you can tell me, and I can adapt my app. And the next week, I have a. What we need to do to bring a product to the market, to pivot the product in the market, is to do the regulatory registration, the toxicology studies. We need to scale it up to manufacturing, to a tank of 250,000 liters. We need to have a tanker truck bring it to a plant. They need to make the ingredients. So we're not as agile as software developers, right? That's and that slows us down in a way, but that is also the reality that we are making money and we're implementing policy in the market by physically producing stuff and sending it to our customers' manufacturing plants, and that has an inherent slowness in it.
Awesome.
So it also means, in my view, that we, even though we're an ingredient company that sells to companies that sell to, we're B2B, right? We don't sell to consumers. We still do a lot of market research to see what people in the world like and maybe are gonna like, and we try to anticipate so that we can also educate our customers, like, we see this trend coming, we think you need to develop products in this direction. And by the way, we have the ingredients for that.
That's awesome that you're fostering this sort of three-way dialogue to really drive the relevance of what you're doing in today's world, but also in tomorrow's world as well. I think now is a good time to take a few more questions. Now I want to see more hands. Caroline?
Yes. Hi. I'd like to know a little bit about open innovation strategies you have in the company, since innovation takes time.
Very good question. So open innovation is basically what do you do external versus internal? At certain moments, 10 years ago, people started saying 60% of R&D is external. Well, that's pretty bold, right? So I think open innovation, I have the feeling we always do too little. There's a lot going on in the world that we would probably be better at doing if we would do more externally. Just to give an indication, I think in total, if you really just kind of look at my budget, I think something like 25% of my overall R&D budget is probably spent externally versus internally. That's not enough, I think, but it's also constrained by economic realities, because you have to pay your people, you have to pay your buildings, you have to pay your consumables. So to keep your current R&D organization sort of running already takes a lot of your budget. So we do about 25%. In pharma industry, I met with the CTO of Eli Lilly recently. He said, I think 40% of my pharmaceutical leads are currently coming externally and 60 internally. That's because of a data point. We sometimes say, like, probably nowadays around 40% of our really our sort of inventions that lead to our new next generation of products are probably coming externally versus internally. So I think we're okay. I think we can always do more, but the disappointing factor is that we're always budget limited, and the easiest monetary fund to cut back is the external spend. Yeah, so I think open innovation is very important. We interact with a lot of startups and with large companies, Google on AI, and with academia. I think there's awesome science going on in academia. I'm also against too much industry influence in what happens in academia. Sometimes, I remember when I was still in academia, at a certain point, 50% of the weight of your approval of your grant was sort of by an industry application. I think that's wrong. Yeah, you can have a little bit of a feeling like, hey, what I'm doing, is it ever going to be applicable? But the best fundamental science happens in academia. And we like to look at that and tap into the right connections that we have. I think we should do more. Probably 40% would be a more ideal number. 25% is where we are. So.
Marina.
Thank you so much. I'm Marina, and I was a PhD student, but now I work in venture capital. And there is a lot of innovation, especially in the age of AI, and there is innovation for the sake of innovation, which is amazing. But at the same time, solving real problems, what do you think is the actual solution to that? Really finding the correct problems and being able to incorporate those into the market, basically.
Can you maybe help me understand what?
How do you measure innovation in terms of what innovation will be successful?
Interesting question. So basically, what metrics do I use to do that? Yeah, that's so we have a whole dashboard of metrics that we measure every month on R&D, because the business people are basically asking us like, what is your return on investment? A couple of most important. If I really look at fundamental science, number of patent applications per year. I'm the first one that says like, well, the number is actually not the most important thing, because it's the quality of your patent and the value and how your patents translate to actual products. But in my view, the number is still important. If we go down from like 200 to 50, there's something wrong. So, okay, so number of patents per, then of course it is also, we measure, for example, the NPS value, we say, like what percentage of your overall company revenue comes out of new products. And we define new products as being launched in the last 5 years. Or we say four plus, if you will, like mid-year, 5 years. Right, and we are around, depending on the division. If you're like in a more commodity business, but like let's say in our biotech division, we are around anywhere between 30 and 40%. We publish that number externally, so it's no secret, but 30 to 40% of our revenue comes out of products over the last 5 years, which is pretty good. It's above average. It's pretty good from an innovation perspective, but it also means that the industries we're in have a very fast turnover of products. The one you launch today will probably need to be replaced in 3-4 years from now because the customer asking a better one. Right, so that's one. Return on investment, return on invested capital. So if I develop a product that needs to be manufactured in a manufacturing tank, how much money do I make out of every cubic meter of fermenter in any day? And if I have a product that is awesome, but it requires a really big tank because my yield is very low and it takes 10 days to produce, that is an expensive product to produce, so it's not as favorable. So we calculate that. So we have a lot of these sort of metrics that are measuring what the sort of financial output is. Nowadays, we also have sustainability metrics. Every project in my portfolio has a sustainability value proposition. And at every stage gate transition, we measure if the sustainability value proposition is still met. And we don't start any project anymore in R&D now that doesn't either have a positive sustainability benefit or a health benefit. So, yeah. So those are just a few. We have something like 18 metrics, but yeah.
Okay, we take a final question and then we move on.
Awesome. Thank you. Michael, I'm a founder of an early stage green methanol fermentation startup. You mentioned that you spend about 20% on like the fundamental research to always sustain like a stable core technology basis. How much pressure do you face to outsource all this? And basically, you specifically mentioned, for example, strain development to just like purchase a better strain from another company or startup or whatever.
Very good. It depends a little bit on the. I mentioned we have a new CEO. He's all about external, collaborate, partnerships, etc. So there's a lot of pressure to continuously evaluate what should you do internally than externally. In my view, there's also a lot of education that we need to do, because the CEO and even your direct business president doesn't necessarily understand your field very well, right? These people come in, these senior leaders, they come from another industry. So there's a continuous cycle of education going on. The danger of that is, I think, that there's a continuous cycle of defensiveness going on. You have to defend what you're currently doing. So let's take your example of a strain, like a manufacturing strain for an enzyme. I am convinced that we are among the top 2, if not the top 1 in the world of technology in building expression strains. We've been doing this for 40 years. The genetic we have is awesome. When I made strains 10 years ago, actually, I thought they were awesome. Nowadays, you see a lot of good strains. You see one strain there, which is control. And somebody will point out, that's my strain, actually. So where I thought we were plateauing out at certain markets, are you close to your theoretical expression yield? You're actually not, because with all the advances in gene editing, DNA sequencing, you can still progress a lot. Certain things I think you need to do internally to keep the knowledge close to your heart. However, even in that area, there is genome-wide AI models nowadays that are able to predict the effect of mutations, etc. So we work with Google, on those kind of things. So even in those areas, you have to collaborate externally now. And some stuff you can better insource just by buying something externally. We have an example where we needed certain strains. We weren't able to do it for like 5 years. We were struggling until we met someone externally, and they had a platform strain. We internalized those strains. We built some of our own genetics on top of those strains, and they're actually way better than what we had. So I think it's a balance. Yeah. The challenge, though, there is also as well, we manufacture in China. China is an awesome market. I'm going to be there next week. Great people. Do I put the newest strain with the best genetics in our manufacturing plant in Wuxi in China? The answer is no. The business people there complain about, like, well, my economics are not favorable because your strain is not good enough. And I know you have a strain, but you give me this strain. And that's right, because the moment I put it there, likely 2 years later, that strain is present in all of my competitor plants, because the knowledge gets lost. Mm-hmm. So there's all kind of practical challenges why you sometimes are limited in what you can do internally and externally, including not putting your best technology everywhere. So
what you're saying is mostly a case by case to say, rather than you have like some value control.
Yep.
Thank you. I think I want to spend the last 20 minutes or so that we have looking a little bit into the future, because hopefully what we have sitting here in the audience today are the leaders of tomorrow. So, maybe in 20, 25 years from now, someone else will be sitting in this chair from this group.
You need the talent.
We need the talent, yes. And I want to see from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest untapped potential across innovation at the intersection of healthcare, agri-tech, and biotech? And how can young leaders, as these ones in the audience, position themselves now to really make use of this untapped potential as they go forward in their careers?
Now, I think maybe I'm going to separate my answer there again in 2 different parts. First of all, from a science perspective. And it sounds a bit contradictory, but ultimately, if we hire people in the organization, even our future leaders, we don't need managers. Yeah, we need managers ultimately, but we want people that bring something to us that we don't have yet, which is a very specific technical skill set. Mm-hmm. Right? When we looked at it 10 years ago, we didn't have any person in the organization which understood what 15 years ago, what gene editing was, so we need to hire people that come from academia, that have these latest skills. Now with AI, the same, the best AI digital people that are doing all of our machine learning kind of models around everything are not coming internally because we don't have these people. We need to hire them. So in my view, you need to know what you're good at and really bring something that we don't have. Yet, that said, the future untapped potential will come from the best combination of sciences everywhere, from discovery, molecular biology, biochemistry, protein engineering, fermentation science, formulation science, recovery, filtration, analytical, regulatory. If you are able to combine those disciplines into a very fast cycle R&D, that is where you add the value. So you, besides being really strong at one thing, you need to be able to collaborate with many people that have their own one things and combine that actually.
So you mentioned that you started as a molecular biologist. So how did you, across your career, learn to speak those different languages, like the business language, the collaborator language, the academic language, and of course the management language? So how did you unite all of those languages, and how do you switch between them on a daily basis?
That's a good question. So of course, if you work for a company, where you always have internal leadership development programs, right? I did all of them, right, including the executive leadership development program. Very useful, but 80% of what the answer to that question is learning on the job. So if I go to a manufacturing plant, I want to understand what their life looks like and what is their oxygen utilization rate. I think the solution for me personally is learning on the job, being really interested in what these people do. I want to know what drives what are their challenges. If I'm in a fermentation plant or in our process hallway, which is across the hall from my office, even if they're at 2 a.m. running a fermenter there, I sometimes go in, I talk to these people, and I want to know, what are you working on? What is your biggest challenge today, and how can we help you solve it? So I think a true interest in what other people are doing, including business. If I sit in a business meeting and I see these people coming up with marketing strategies, etc. First of all, something like, well, I'm glad I'm in R&D. But also, I am interested in what drives them, and that ultimately helps you sort of speak the language, and at least, even if you're glad you're not doing that job, you understand what they need from you, and you can probably try to help them solve their problems, right? So that's, I think, learning on the job and being passionate, being authentic, and really trying to understand what drives those people is probably the best solution in my view.
Kind of continuing on from that topic, I mean, the work you've done at IFF and beyond, and really your scientific and people leadership is what driving progress every day. So what are, from your perspective, the key leadership traits and qualities that you focus on and that you feel like this next generation should be really fostering?
Yeah, first of all, I do believe it's very still important, no matter what management or leadership level you have, to stay close to what matters, right? And in my case, that's R&D, that's science, right? I think things like authenticity, you can also say, hey, now I'm a leader, now I need to stand in front of, and now I need to behave like a manager. I think people feel like, well, why did he change his behavior all of a sudden, right? I think authenticity, stay true to who you are, right? It doesn't mean you can't work on your executive presence. If you work with a board, you need to show up in a slightly different way than when you are in a meeting with technicians, right? But stay true to your passion, to your personality. Don't pretend you're all of a sudden someone else. Things like servant leadership, I find very important too. Again, going back to my role is primarily also trying to help people succeed in what they are good at. Well, it's not telling them what to do. It's not, it's telling them what I need, right? But they probably know better how to achieve that if I give them the right boundary conditions, right, about how to solve the problem than I do. So I think sort of servant, humble leadership, staying true to yourself. I still read scientific papers, so I know kind of why people still are excited about the progression of science, and trying to help people excel in what they're good at. I think that is key. Yeah.
And how do you build this culture of trust between you and them, that you give the direction, but then of course it's you trust in them to execute it based on their expertise and skills? And also, how do you block out the noise from too many opinions
Yep.
and too many
I think
pressures.
that is an eternal challenge, right? Unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago, I needed to travel to the East Coast, and the only reason why I traveled there was that I needed to do an organizational realignment, basically meaning some people's jobs were eliminated. And I wanted to do that myself because they were higher level leaders. They were really good people, right? But unfortunately, because of a direction change, their jobs became redundant. It is very hard then, of course, if the next time you come to have the trust there, like, hey, here I am now again. I want to support you guys. You guys are an awesome site. Well, the previous visit was basically letting go 6 of their colleagues, right? I think as long as you are able to explain why certain unfortunate things need to happen, why you're doing it, and how it's ultimately going to help the organization to stay financially healthy, to stay agile, etc., you still can retain the support of the people. Like, ultimately, we're trying to do the right thing for the future of the company. Right? And there are many opinions always and many noises, especially nowadays in society with all the geopolitical challenges we have around the world. A lot of people, especially I'm European actually, so I still look at the US a little bit as a visitor there, even though I've been there 12 years, but very polarized nowadays. To me, that doesn't really matter. Everybody's entitled to have their own opinion about what is good or bad for the US. As long as we respect that and are able to create a culture of trust on the working floor that we are all in the same team ultimately. Right? Which is also the way we look at the world nowadays. Why are there so many conflicts in the world? Ultimately, we're all on the same team. We're trying to solve the same problems. So we shouldn't have all these problems, right? That's very idealistic, of course. But of course, internally, we try to build a culture and say, like, we respect all of our cultural differences of opinion, but we are here for a common purpose. Right? And you can still do that even though if I disagree with you on politics, we can still be on the same team and produce awesome products. Right?
Amazing. So since we have only 10 minutes left, I would like to open the floor now for final questions, as I'm sure there will be many, before we give our concluding remarks. So I see there is already a question.
Thank you so much. My name is Julia. And you mentioned a lot of different disciplines that you work with, but most of them technical. And in innovation, I know that in R&D, you want to ultimately create things that is going to be applied by people and real life situations. So talking about multidisciplinary teams, where do you put social sciences, history, politics? And you mentioned it before, but ultimately everything involves people, and you're going to develop things for people. Where's this disciplines place in your R&D role?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So sort of the disadvantage of being an R&D organization in an ingredient chemical biotech technology company is that 95% of your people are nerds in a way, right? They are hardcore scientists, they're engineers, etc. It doesn't mean they don't have social or societal skills. So I think, yes, we have a marketing department, we have a panoptic framework with specialized people that look in societies where the needs are going, what people's preferences are changing, etc. And we as R&D interact on a daily basis almost with those people, and we listen to them. And I think as well, if you are generally interested in what they are sensing, and of course, I'm also reading the newspaper, I'm reading my LinkedIn feed every day, and you see all this kind of as long as you realize that ultimately what we're doing is bringing some good things for people. It makes you realize, like, well, I can be very passionate about science, and that's my role in the company, but ultimately I need to bring something to the market that people are going to use and like, and hopefully buy again. So I think a little bit depending on where you are, maybe if you're a graveyard technician in the pilot plant and you work from like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., you need a little bit less of that than when you are a project leader that is trying to determine what product specs your product needs to be giving. But I think all of us need a part of the understanding of that as well. So it's an interesting spectrum. Yeah.
The guys are being a little bit shy.
Hi, thank you for your fascinating advice. If money wasn't part of the equation, what would be the first product or problem you would dive into?
I would massively want to replace petrol-based chemicals and ingredients with bio-based, sustainable petrol ingredients. Yeah. And the reason why I answer that to this specific question is that in many cases nowadays, that is economically not viable. I can mention one interesting thing that I discussed yesterday at length with a big company as well. So we did work for 20 years. Nowadays, you would never have started that anymore because the investor would have said 20 years, come on, I need money tomorrow. But 20 years on a biopolymer platform. So we now have commercialized this year our first products that are turning sucrose, into biopolymers that are going to be used in laundry detergents, in packaging, in cosmetics, that are replacing petrol-based polymers. And that actually is an example that now works from an economical perspective because it adds superior performance, it is bio-derived, and it is fully biodegradable. And all companies now want to have that more or less. It still probably won't work to replace like massive commodity polymers, which are too expensive for that. But we brought it down to a price point where it can really compete with petrol-based polymers, even at moderate price levels. So we are working in that direction. But I think still in many cases, the commoditized chemicals are still way too cheap for us to play in that space. Yeah.
And I think that goes back exactly to what you were saying. I mean, ultimately, the customer expects something to be sustainable, but what they care about is what they actually have to pay for it and how it performs. So we need to be mindful about that as we innovate, because an innovation that is not adopted is not a useful innovation ultimately for creating impact. I think I would want to close off with just a final question to you, which is, if you were sitting in this audience right now, what is one piece of advice that you would give your younger self for the years to come?
Yeah, maybe as sort of a more senior person in my career, I think one observation that I have, people sometimes ask, like, how did you get to where you are right now? You know, I have never really had a 5 to 10 year plan. You know, which sounds weird. You know, did I make choices in my career? Of course, a lot. Almost every year, I need to make a choice. Like, well, there's this opportunity. Am I going to do it or not? As long as you stay true to where your passion is. You know, I have people that are almost at the same level as I have, that are individual scientists that are driving the whole field of protein engineering. And honestly, I think they're harder to find than someone like myself, because those people are really passionate about a certain science. And without excellent science, we are not going to win the economy later on. So I think follow your passion. Try to think about where your destiny would be, but also be very flexible. You know, be ready to make choices, because before you know it, someone will ask you, your boss maybe, like, do you want to do this? And then you have to choose within 1 week, am I going to do that or not? That is, I think, a more important choice than what I want to do in 10 years from now.
Yeah. And be prepared to capture that opportunity, though, right? Like,
so you have to be prepared.
Yes.
Which I think you are when you really understand what you like a lot. And I've had people that I put in a major project leader role, and ultimately they said, like, well, this is all nice and thanks for the recognition, but can I go back to a more individual role? Because that's what I like more. That's a choice too.
Yes, and that is one that actually I think not many people respect, but in reality, knowing yourself and who you are and where you contribute best.
I've had many people that say, like, well, if you need me to have 10 reports, I'm happy to help out, but I prefer not to have reports because I prefer to do that's also very useful. To me, that's not like, oh, they're worse than, no, that's very useful too. Right?
Exactly. Well,
so be ready to make choices based on how well you know yourself. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think that is a sentiment that was echoed across the speeches of the 3 days, you know, find your North Star and like go for it. But yes, also allow for some serendipity. I mean, we know that some of the best things in science happened through serendipity. So I'm sure we can appreciate what big impact that has as well on our work, but also on our personal development as well. Well, with that, I want to thank you so very much, Casper.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.